Yes, they were.
Crushing the beat.
They went up to a hill to get my TVs.
Yeah.
I was like, just a bag of tea.
just put it in hot water. Come on, help me out here.
And that's hard. Wait.
So I'm really glad I get to present to all of you because I wanted to talk about weightlifting beyond the physical, because most people know me as either associated with lifting or something related to a heavy object. But I wanted to kind of share a story about what took me into the journey of weightlifting and share a lot of the things, the emotional, mental stuff that people aren't really talking about on like the NSCA websites and all the stuff that you can only get from old school coaches. But when I was 14, you know, that was when all my friends were getting into football and I wasn't really very athletic. And of course, we're at some friend's house and the kids who were into football had a bench press. And of course, everyone's like, yeah, let's play basketball and bench press. So I didn't know anything about bench pressing and I didn't know how to tension my arms. So I had an unfortunate accident where the bar smacked my mouth and I was wearing braces at the time. And so my braces pretty much got glued to my lip and it caused a trauma response around anything related to weight training. So the only time I could come back to weight training was when I was in my mid-20s. And that was about the time when I decided to change my physical fitness. I was smoking a pack a day at the time. I didn't know how to dispel any anxiety, and that's when I was like, I gotta change something. And that's when I got taken in as an intern at a CrossFit gym because I didn't want to kill myself. And luckily I had a good mentor who, his name's Salty Menace, but he took me to my first weightlifting competition and I basically swept his gym for him to teach me to be a personal trainer, get my certification, and he encouraged me to just try out weightlifting just to see what it was like. And as an adult, I had a lot of fears and stuff around it that I couldn't explain to all these people who were very athletic. So that's been this kind of quest for for me to explain and help adults who are learning things as they're older and they don't have all these, they have all these fears and traumas. And so this presentation is about my last probably decade of observing that in people. And Candace had the opportunity to kind of see the way that I teach weightlifting, which is, and Tony too, it's just a little bit different than, all right, you know, lock out your arms, brace your abs. It's like,
very approachable.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's what I would like, is for people to see this and sort of dispel some of the myths. So anyway, there will be a practical portion, so obviously. Okay, so weightlifting, the sport, is not powerlifting. It's not about tomato red faces, spotters, heavy metal music. It's also not about bad tans and, you know, I mean, you wear a singlet. It's not about how ripped you are. Weightlifting is a sport. It's about what you can do. It's like gymnastics with public speaking on steroids. It's all of your fears amplified until you learn how to channel them. So we're going to talk about how the physical fear reflexes you have can be moderated. So we'll actually demonstrate to you later how. This is Tommy Kono. He was born in a Japanese internment camp in California, and he was a 3-time Olympic champion from the Bay Area. He trained in his garage, and he actually was one of my heroes. I got to meet him in 2013. He passed away a couple years ago, but he always talked about the mental side of weightlifting. It's not about just being a caveman and just lifting. It's about tuning something inside. I didn't understand what he was talking about, but it's a completely mental sport. Hold on, it's a sport. So here's the snatch, which is one movement. I tried to slow it down a little bit so that you could see. As you can see, there's no heavy metal in the background. This is the clean and jerk. These are the two lifts contested in the sport. don't have to be done with a barbell. They can be done with a kettlebell, dumbbell, and it's all about the reflexes in your body being timed well. And I'm not a big guy, and I learned that the tendons and ligaments are more important than your actual muscle power. And so Darian's presentation really showed everybody, like, demonstrably, like, how important the balls of the feet are and that sense of gravity through it. Because one of the things that is a common myth is that this is a deadlift with a triple extension, and it's not. It's actually a little bit different. It's using the spring of your own tendons and ligaments to elevate the weight for a second and then receive it like you're catching a vase. So it's really much about grace and sensitivity and not so much about brute power. And a common myth is that people learn to lift through professional lifters watching videos. It's the worst way to do it. Completely, because they are mutants on Earth. Like, they are picked specifically because they have all the attributes, and most humans lack 90% of the right attributes to do it, especially lever legs. And another thing too, especially how people are always trying to sell Olympic lifting to strength and conditioning, like in high school and college, it doesn't actually build strength or power. It only expresses what you already have. So it's more about honing what they call proliferating and pruning the nervous system. So that's where, you know, they don't talk a lot about the neurological impact of this stuff. And that anything neurological releases fears and traumas. Like, you just have to deal with that stuff. So that's one reason I think Olympic lifting gets pushed to the side a lot, because nobody talks about the mental benefits, or it's hard to tangibly demonstrate them. Anyway, so I would say, so this photo is taken by Tony at his current gym called The Farm. I would prefer to think of weightlifting as meditation. And an older weightlifting coach, his name's Joe Dube, he said that the weightlifter's destiny is controlled by the nervous system. And it took me like 5 or 6 years to understand what he meant by that. And it is really about understanding yourself and your own nervous system, your reflexes, your tendons and ligaments, and especially your own healing cycles, both physically and emotionally. Meaning, like, how long does it actually take for me to make a neurological change? Like, if I go to sleep 3 days later, I feel the difference. And that's why I think, like, programs with numbers and reps and sets don't do a good job of really representing the journey of something like this, because you don't know how long it's going to take. So when they say a weightlifter's destiny, sometimes that can mean in the sport. But I would like to think that just means anybody's movement practice. Like, where do they end up with something? What kind of imprint does it leave on them? Like, do they smile when they have a weightlifting practice? Or are they like, fuck, I have, you know, there's this culture around, like, blaming the coach for, like, coach wants to kill me with sets of 10. And I'm like, you're choosing to do the 10s. You hired the coach. Is that not a victim mentality? And instead, empowering yourself to be like, how do I want to practice this? And that's what I'm going to give today, is a couple of tools so that you can incorporate any way and any intensity, lighter, hard, however you want. Because I don't like to be told what to do, which is why I didn't have good relationships with a lot of weightlifting coaches, because they're used to, they didn't elicit like me asking questions. They're just like, you do this, you do that. But Saul never told me what to do. He just taught me how to think for myself. But Saul's more of a CrossFit coach, so I agree with that relationship. But he's still my mentor. Weightlifting is sort of like archery. It is about controlling tension and then releasing it at the right moment. And it's sort of like a Zen koan. You have to be relaxed in a heightened fear state, which is kind of like athletic. Anytime you're kind of like, whoa, I'm really paying attention, you know, I'm in the moment, but you have to do a task. But it's also like a dance routine, where there are steps and you can make it pretty. You can practice on your own just by yourself. And so, and I'm not going to use any jargon here, because Lord knows how much jargon we have already in fitness. Another one of my mentors, I'm going to wax philosophical for the next couple slides, but his name is Bob Takano. He's been a weightlifting coach for like 50 years. And he was a high school PE teacher. But he's seen so many levels of weightlifters from all the way from middle school all the way to like, you know, Olympic level. And he said to me, like, weightlifters are truth seekers. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, well, they want to know what's really possible. And they want to test it. And also, the sport of weightlifting is sort of like a game of pool, where you have to call the corner pocket that you're going to shoot the ball in, and then you got to do it. So they always have to say, I'm going to lift this weight, and then they go do it. Or they don't, and it's very binary. But so in that way, I started to see weightlifting as more of a self-actualization practice, because the sport itself doesn't attract me as much as the growth process. I'm sure you are all familiar with Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs. Well, in my own kind of personal way, I started to see Western culture doesn't provide a lot of pathways for people to keep going in their own journey, like after college. That's pretty much it. People are kind of like, I don't have to learn anymore. But weightlifting is sort of this pathway, at least for me, for achieving a lot of peak experiences. And as a lifter and a person who's been in competition, I actually see me being a coach as more of my self-actualization and personal growth, because I get to see people take care of their basic safety, which is psychological too. Also like how to eat, how to sleep, and actually take care of themselves. So in a way, I'm coaching them to be able to do self-actualizing things. I didn't know that, but so the sport is really designed around managing all these mundane aspects of life that are super important to us, which we're all responsible for educating people on. Unfortunately, our culture doesn't do a good job of that. So, this GIF was fun to put in there. So, weightlifting as a psychedelic. And when I say psychedelic, I mean something that can drop one's ego and present a new opportunity to become somebody else, a belief system. And with kind of like I experiment with psychedelics, and in a way where I am trying to step back from my everyday personality and look at what is it composed of. And every time I come back to weightlifting, it's sort of this way to express it physically. Anytime I learn something about my personality, it's like, okay, I have to figure out how to integrate that into my everyday life now. So, but I've seen so many people, their personality change a little bit once they've gone on this journey. Not necessarily become a weightlifter, but just see that they can deal with their own fears and anxieties in a positive way. Am I moving too fast, or is this?
No, it's
okay.
Good speed.
So a term that I found very interesting was psychic ambiance. Has anybody heard that term before? Okay, so that came to my awareness a couple months ago after I talked with Bob Tucano, and he said that he used to teach with a Latin jazz saxophonist named Mike Ture. And he said that, Mike Ture said that anytime he went to another country, he could always find a Latin jazz place, no matter where he went. And they would always know, like, oh yeah, Latin jazz. And they would just get each other, and they would vibe, and they would be able to step into what they call the psychic ambiance, where everyone's doing the same thing as you, kind of like us. And that it was important that that was the foundation of the culture, that everybody knew what was happening. And so that's why CrossFit has been a very confusing blessing for weightlifting, because it's a very loud, kind of fast-paced activity combined with something that is traditionally very quiet and focused. Because a real weightlifting gym doesn't play music. It's dead silent. All you hear is crashing weights, grunting, swearing, and that's it. But so the coach really has to determine the culture of the group to create the psychic ambiance. So it's not really just about reps and sets, it's about the vibe of a person as a coach. So yeah, let's interact a little bit. Interoception. I know this is a nice word that Jen has used many times.
Just a couple. Just try not to put my slideshow.
where your hips and spine, and also like what's going on around your head. Very basic stuff. Because it's a fear management system. Rather than teaching people technique, I try to teach them how physical fear and their reflexes happen when you get like startled or when you feel like you're gonna get hit in the face or get crushed. So adrenaline and physical fear definitely impact our movement. It can cause reflexive tension, but it doesn't have to always be that way. We can control that, and that's the kind of process we're talking about over a slow course of time. Yeah, so fear causes tension, and that's why sets and reps aren't really helpful when you're talking about the nervous system. Because someone could be scared for like 35 seconds, and we don't know how long that's going to be. 3 by 8, I don't know. What does that mean? You know, so. But the nervous system, once we sense less threat, it promotes speed as a result. So when we can start to understand how to interact with them, these physical fears, we can actually, we don't have to be fast, we just become fast. Which could be a long time to understand, because I would try to be powerful and fast, and I would hear weightlifting coaches say things like, be more athletic. And I would be like, okay, what does that even mean? I mean, I heard a coach say, more proprioception, and I was like, this is a guy who coaches like world champion level guys, and I was like, what does that mean?
The worst cue ever.
Right? And so this is at least what I've encountered, our human fears as reflexes, with regard to weightlifting. Getting crushed, falling over, suffocating, getting hit in the face, throwing out our back, and especially, this one was crazy to understand, looking silly or embarrassed in front of the tribe. And guess what? Olympic lifting tackles all of those. Like, it just makes all of those things real all of a sudden. When you step into a CrossFit gym or weightlifting and you're like, oh my God, these possibilities are real. Mm-hmm. You know, not just walking down the street, but this is a real thing that can happen. But that's also what's attractive to people. For people who want to beat a fear, like myself, this is the perfect medicine, right?
And that's the thing, it's a decision. It's a decision to go into this place and do this stuff.
Yeah.
It's a commitment, it's a willingness.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because if I, as a coach, don't understand that they are already putting up a lot of effort to decide to do this, and you're just like, oh, you're not trying hard enough, or you need to be more athletic, that's going to scare somebody away. And that honestly is why weightlifting is suffering right now, because we don't have enough receptiveness to people.
It's not a welcoming environment.
No, it's not, because part of it is the coach is creating the psychic ambiance, but also the coach needs to be able to welcome newcomers too. That's a social skill. Tony's been with me to these weightlifting gyms before, especially California Strength. Yeah. And you know, he's an easy guy to get along with.
Yeah, it just wasn't an inviting thing. They were kind of all showing off for each other, really.
Right.
Yeah. So some of the protective, by the way, this has no scientific backing to it. This is just stuff that I've kind of observed. What's that?
Clinical observation.
Yeah. The grip reflex. Like when you watch a scary movie and someone scares you, you go, ah! So that's definitely a thing. The startle reflex is kind of connected to that. Like when somebody pokes you from behind, you're like, ooh, and then your whole body seizes up. And that actually is very important, because that is what we call the impulse in Olympic lifting. That's that moment where you go completely frozen for a second to generate power and then relax. The stumble reflex, those damn Legos. Like when you fall on something, you step and you go, oh my God, and then your leg kicks out. That's super important, like with the psoas just flipping out and protecting us. Because that plays a part in catching balance. And the Valsalva reflex, when we're exerting, we're trying to protect our organs, and purposely doing that versus like unconsciously doing it can change our movement a lot. So channeling them into the bar. If you're not familiar with these terms, it's okay. We're going to actually go through pictures so you can kind of see. The grip reflex. If you actually take out your hand and you make a fist and squeeze it as hard as you can, try to move your wrist, and you'll feel how solid your wrist can go. So that's not actually good in weightlifting because it's a finesse sport, but if you take your thumb and you squeeze it as hard as you can with your index and middle finger, now you've got a purchase on something, but now you can move your wrist. So that's called hook grip. And we do that specifically because we need to be able to move our wrist, but also grip something. So it's also very painful when you're lifting a metal object at first, so it takes some time, but this is an easy way to hold something and have wrist flexibility. And the startle reflex, you've probably seen or heard people shout a little bit or make some kind of grunty noise before they lift, and that's to actually tap into their fight or flight system as a fight response, instead of kind of going jelly and limp. They go, and they kind of try to rev themselves up. And yeah, the Valsalva reflex, they breathe and they purposely have a breathing kind of routine. But the stumble reflex is actually helpful on something called the split jerk. When people are lifting the weight above their head and their feet split, that's that same stumble reflex they're using. Their foot is kicking out automatically. They're not actually doing it consciously. It just goes, and then their feet find balance. So, kind of cool. Yeah, so timing is everything. Timing of tension and relaxation is the name of the game. So it's about modifying our reaction to this physical fear. Do I clamp up or go limp? That's an important question I ask people, because sometimes they'll be embarrassed and they'll be like, well, I don't, and it's like, it's okay. You want to know just so you know for your own benefit. So it's a fear management system, but it's also task-based fitness. That was something I learned with Online Movement University, if you have heard of that community. That was like a mind-blowing thing a couple of years ago, because I'd never seen anything as like a task. I was just like, it's an exercise. But the tasks we are going to kind of go over are like how to produce the force, how to store it, like Valsalva, how to absorb it, like catch it like a vase, and then redirect it, which is important. And I think the most important aspect for sport is how to redirect force. And then figure out how to manage how these reflexes and physical fears affect us. I think we're coming up at the end of the sciencey stuff. So, tendons and ligaments, not muscle power. The tendons and the ligaments are super important, and they heal very slowly. So, it's not about muscle power. That's how these tiny people can lift huge weights without too much mass. It's really the timing of the stretch and the contraction of these things. But like yesterday we saw, it is really about knowing how to access them. And I think that is the one thing I didn't know how to teach or understand until like yesterday. I was like, that's what I've been trying to teach. But this was very concrete. Like, I need people to do this other than outside of the weightlifting context. Because the shoes that we wear are actually, have you seen those heels that they have underneath? They actually promote us being on the balls of the feet, but coaches mistakenly teach lifting to be on the heels. And so that's why a lot of people will say, oh, this hurts my back, or this hurts my knees or my hips, because they're supposed to be on the balls of their feet, with their pelvis free to move, not on their heels, because it locks the pelvis. Which Jen showed yesterday too, like certain plate positions, it locks your hip, and then others it opens. Okay, so now let's get into the stuff, the foundations, like what is all this stuff, like the posture, breathing, foot balance. This is as simple as I could make it. And then if you have any questions, let me know. Cues to remember. We'll come back to this, but there's no fancy terms, just hands up, shape the chest, pants down, because everyone knows how to fold their pants up, right? But that's the most important one. Yeah, we'll come back to this. So the posture, a column, not an S shape. So a lot of times people are teaching neutral spine flow weightlifting, and in order for us to be able to absorb the force of the weight, we have to be an absolute extension. So the lumbar and the thoracic have to be extended. So it's that really tall chest. And the reason is because if we're in an S shape, it's going to collapse, even if we're held our breath. And when people tell people to breathe into the belly, there's nothing supporting the thoracic. And the bar is up here. So when CrossFit coaches will teach, breathe through expand your belly, but there's nothing here. And people is like, this hurts my shoulder. And they're like, you need to do more K-star mobility. And it's like, actually, no, you just didn't know where to breathe. So in that little cartoon, the puffy chest and the narrow waist is very much what bodybuilders very value is like that. But it actually locks the lumbar and it puts a lot of pressure so you can't crush yourself with the weight. And it also puts a lot of support for the shoulders. So that's posture. Let's actually try it really quick. If everyone could just, if you can find a seat, that would be helpful, but you can actually do it sitting down. If you slouch, and then kind of just roll your chest forward, and then you can come up to either a 90-90 or a 90-90, and then make your waist very narrow, and then inhale so that you feel your ribs expand, and then your chest gets bigger without your shoulders raising. So if you can wiggle your arms are in good shape. But as long as your torso is inflated and you can feel some stretch here, that's solid. That's good enough to lift. And the arms need to be relaxed so that they can move. So we call those water arms. And then cement arms are when you grip something, right? You use that startle reflex, and that's that timing. So that's all it is. Oh, we just went through breathing. So the expansive breathing. So, and you don't actually want to raise your shoulders because then it takes away the support of the scapula. At the end of the lift, though, you do want to be shrugging, just to support the weight. But all right. So foot balance. Let's actually stand up together and let's just whatever stance is comfortable for you. I want you to just see how fast you can fall into a squat on the balls of your feet. So your heels can lift off the ground. They can go, you can lift them off just like a millimeter or two. And you'll feel how, like yesterday when we were on the transverse arch, if you don't grip your toes, you'll be able to move a little bit easier. And I used to teach toe gripping, but I don't think I'm going to do that. And I want you now to try the same thing, but land flat-footed on your heels. And feel how your pelvis locks. It doesn't really feel good, but even if you have shoes, that doesn't feel good either because the pelvis is now like in lumbar flexion. So it's not good to bear weight. You've probably seen people go, oh, turtle back, and it takes a year to come up. Well, that's not fun. So that's the balance of the balls of the feet. But so shoulder position, internal rotation, and most of that is because the internal rotation, the bar has to be in front of us so we can bring our elbows high, and so we call that shave the chest. And a lot of times people are taught shoulders back, chest out, and what that does is it actually locks your scapula so you cannot actually move, which is good in certain situations, but at the end of the lift it's good. Again, here this allows us to bring the elbows high, and because the barbell is in front of us, but even with the weight, the dumbbell, the kettlebell is going to be in front of you. So this applies across the board. Blades apart, which means like spreading, and that big kind of puffy chest is very much like a authority kind of posture, power pose. And then blades together is fixed shoulders. We want to end in support with our shoulder sticks. And so you can even feel that if you just hold here and you kind of puff your chest and lean forward just a little bit, you can feel your blades squeeze. If you kind of jet your head forward, you can feel, wow, that feels pretty supportive through my whole upper body, no matter where I am. So that feeling of security is very important with a weight over your head. Even in hand balancing, that's the same sensation you want us to feel stacked.
And I think that idea of scapula to the midline right? Like supported toward the middle. You move it out, and they need to be out in order to come back in. If they're already in, there's nowhere to go.
Exactly. Very good. Yes. And so that shoulders together, and it's very confusing. People just want to follow orders.
Yeah.
And I get that. But that's something that is also like a problem because people have been taught through different systems that aren't verified to teach weightlifting. And then they come to me and they're like, but I've been doing this for the last 5 years and my shoulders are junk. And I'm like, just try this one thing. And they're like, oh my God, I've never felt this. And I want that to be possible for any adult because it's not like they have to do a bunch of stretching, it's just positioning.
And it's I think, too, like, lead me to self-actualization. Like, tell me how to get there. And it's like, you gotta walk.
Yeah, exactly. I like
And
that.
it's that function of the homogenized teaching that we were talking about yesterday, trying to just pump out CrossFit coaches.
Mm-hmm. Oh, coach purses. So staying in the lines, all this means is between the ball of the foot and the edge of the heel, there's this little zone that we want to have the bar moving in so that it doesn't slow down. And if the bar stays in that little column, like when we're lifting, that's why you see people kind of snake themselves around the bar. They're actually just trying to have it travel straight up with a little bit of a curve. So that doesn't feel heavy. So that's what we say, staying in the lines. And we'll learn about how to direct the force up through that line through our legs. We talked a little bit about the hook grip and the regular grip. You can actually practice on your steering wheel when you're driving, and you can feel how easy your wrists are while you're still gripping your steering wheel. That's how you know you're a weightlifter. Okay, so the leg power is, or what we call the impulse, which is the scare reflex. So let's just all come together here, and this is where we say, I want you to pull your pants up like you're got those really tight pants on, and you're just gonna go, and you're gonna try to lock the glutes and the quads at the same time so that your heels kind of pop off and just go. Yeah, you may slide, you may kind of go forward or back, what we call the Michael Jackson pants up drill. And so, and I just want you to feel what it's like to lock at the same time. And it doesn't even need to come that high, it could just be like a millimeter, your heels are a millimeter off the ground. And if you do the shoulder blades thing, you'll feel what they call a shrug. You'll feel that line of force going to your ears. Yeah, exactly. But if you want to feel what it shouldn't feel like, bring your shoulders together and then squeeze only your butt in hip extension. That's kind of like when you see it and you're like, should I go over there? Yeah. Yeah, and so that's what when there's too much hip extension and not enough leg extension, we get this weird banana shape. But, so, that's what the impulse feels like. Can I just hear words like, what did that feel like to you?
Tight.
Tight.
Strong.
Strong. Snappy. Yeah.
And a nice crisp sound.
Yeah, that crisp moment, because after that the bar is already floating and you have the sense of gravity on the balls of the feet. Then, like when we were repositioning our feet, so that receive it, now we're free to, actually let's try, so that you feel you can squat down and still be upright. So a good test is if you just pretend you're holding 2 cups and you don't let the cups fall. And that's where your spot would be. And it can be the same spot too. People can drop in the same spot and that's okay. Sometimes people who have wider hips or longer femurs need to move. Like for me, I have a long torso, so I need to spread my hips and just be able to kind of pop down. Yeah. Great. You just learn Olympic lifting. The other thing about squatting too, you probably see people use the shoes, but the one thing to have the leg power to do this, it's a very knee dominant squat. So it looks very much like a ballet kind of squat. The torso is very upright and the knees travel very forward, so the heels have to raise up a little bit. The shoes help with that, but a lot of times people will offload onto the posterior chain and kind of do a good morning-ish thing because they want the higher number squat. It won't get your legs stronger for lifting though, because you have to be balanced. So we'll actually do a little demo on squatting after, but so the knee dominant squat, you can kind of see A, very upright torso, lifted chest, a lot of hip compression, and then the letter B, the hip dominant one, is very much like a low bar squat or like a position for a deadlift. We don't want that if you want leg power. And then flexion dominant is a relaxed squat, which is kind of just sitting there and kind of, it's not bad, it just is its own kind of squat. But because it has a loose spine, it's not going to be able to transmit force through the lumbar. Shoes increase the range of motion. So that little blue block is what the shoes represent. That's it. Okay, so now let's go to the practical portion. With our feet, we're going to have a little bias towards the balls of the feet so that we're kind of like ready to go. Your feet can be flat, but I just want them to be biased towards the balls of the feet in a transverse arch. And then what I want you to do is just feel that, what we call bamboo legs. Have some tension, don't be completely loose, but don't be so stiff. Just something in between, because we're going to practice the hands up drill, which is the snapping, which is just the light, that moment where you're tight and then relax. So when you tighten, I want you to scoot your feet apart so that you just are in that position where you squatted earlier. Now go 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, and just kind of practice that. Yeah, and your arms, you're gonna water arms, and if you can, kind of lightly puff the chest out so you feel a nice arch in that lumbar, tall spine. I can make sounds because it's just easier. And so, Jen, when you come up here, pop that into that kind of quarter squat. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and this is the quick change between producing force and then absorbing force. So this is what we call jumping down. Yeah. And so if you've got a stick in your hands, what I'm going to have you do is shave your chest so you feel your elbows up high here, your wrists are kind of loose, your knuckles are pointing out. And what you're going to do is you're going to kind of be on the balls of your feet. And you're going to try to drop and put that bar in a place that feels pretty secure. Here you go.
I got hands.
So, Kat, we were just doing the hands up and then hands down. Yeah. And we're just biasing some weight towards the balls of the feet. So if you have the mobility to land flat-footed and squat all the way down, great. But really the balls of the feet are more important. So we're doing the shave the chest position with the elbows. Yeah, there you go. And just exploring that, because once you get down to the bottom here, we're going to either want to lean forward or backwards. I want you to find that spot that feels like you're crushing a can with your hip flexors and you're squeezing your shoulder blades together. So that's how we know we secure the thoracic and the lumbar. Yeah, good. You found your natural positioning. Wherever your femurs like to be, let them be. We want the pelvis to be able to, we just want to be tight through the lumbar, but the hips are loose. Here, you can try it. Nice. And and you can play with how to make rock arms, which is just, or cement arms. My elbow fits where they like to be. And just explore that. And what I'm going to do is come with snatch a little bit wider, helps to kind of help put that bar in the right spot. Hey, there you go. So I'm trying to widen
feel like when my skeleton snap. Good, open. Nice. And then see if you can generate tension by squeezing your toes to the thighs and then getting a little hip flexion, or just squeezing that. There you go. Nice. Good. Good. And then just pull at the bottom there for you. And then squeeze with like rock arms. There we go. Squeeze there. Excellent. Right on. Good solid. Yeah, I want you to make adjustments.
Yeah, this left side.
And so you don't have to go to the depth, you can just go partial. Anytime you have people who have any limitations neurologically, cut the range of motion. I never teach the lift off the ground the first day because it's so mobility intensive to be in this position. It just takes too much skill. So you have them do it just rotate. And you just have them go into quarter squat because it feels safe. The deeper you go into the squat, the more organized you have to be. And it's scary for people to go. That fear of getting crushed by something increases the deeper you go. So anytime you have someone who's just like, and you're like, okay, cut the range of motion. So one of this is being able to have you have tools to teach this to somebody in case they're interested, because it's fun. Can I have you go one more time? And start with the elbows a little higher than your knuckles. Okay. Yeah. And then just, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and if you were here before, just keep them here and that'll lead to a nice flick. Yeah, exactly. And it's okay to kind of land forward because we're finding balance. And when you land, just hold for a second and then see how we feel. You stack. Hold. That's pretty good. And then cement arms and then squeeze through the toes. Awesome, that was good. That would be a very solid bottom position. So, one of the things too is when you are down here, I want you to imagine sitting back towards the heels and then sitting forward so you feel some weight on the balls of the feet. And tell me which one feels more secure to you. The heels or the toes when you sit forward? Toes. Yeah. So the balls of the feet are really where it's at. This is where you have lots of information. On those heels,
No options.
no options. Hips are locked, spine is rounded, and you're gonna go and get out by the end. So that's why we wear the shoes for a lot of beginners. It's not for ankle mobility actually, it's to bias that weight forward. Although people will say, I need ankle mobility, but it's actually not true. As we saw yesterday, it's really about where are you putting that weight. So, do these words make sense? Okay, great, because I'm not going to say interpretation. It's kind of like if you were on a playground and you were a kid and you were pulling yourself on the slide to get some speed. The weight is floating in the air for a second, and it's like a floating pole, and you're trying to either position yourself or trying to pop yourself under. And so, if the lumbar is tight but the legs are relaxed, it'll choose the right spot. But if my legs are stiff, so there's usually somebody who's very, very eager to prove themselves in my classes, and with 30 pounds, they're like acting as if it's a 1 rep max. And then they'll kind of get discouraged because they're like, I'm not doing it right. It's like, relax. And they're like, what do you mean relax? Relax. It's because there's a bar flying at their face. And so they kind of close their eyes and pray for the best. But what I want you to actually do is, I want you to bring the bar like an inch from your throat and just practice rotating it. It doesn't have to touch the collarbone. So can I borrow you for a second?
Yeah.
So, and this one's going to be a narrow grip, like probably like a thumb width apart from your pockets. And then go ahead and just bring the bar. So this is where we would call a front squat, receiving position. It doesn't have to touch here, but what he's doing is he's supporting against my hands. And then what he's doing now is he's going to let the elbows, you're going to bring it down. Yeah. So you're going to come up to the chest height and then rotate. That's it. So it'll probably be right about where your mass is. And if you can try that and just see if you can understand the rotation with just the elbows, and then hold the stick there. Yeah, exactly. And then point the wrist down. Yes.
Now, are we hook gripping here as well or not?
You can, or you can just be relaxed. It doesn't matter. But you can transition the hook grip into the fingers. So the only reason we let the bar kind of rest on our fingers is to actually just balance it across our shoulders. But because there's not enough weight, a lot of times the springiness of our arms won't let the bar go there. But we're actually going to use the barbell so you can experience what that feels like. So, yep, exactly. And then try to bring it to about nipple height and just see if you can practice that rotation. Yes, yes. Yeah, exactly. And keeping the wrists and arms somewhat loose, but a tall spine. Exactly. And so, can I borrow your stick for a second? So now you can practice doing the same thing, but here I'm going to be on my toes, bars a little lower, and I'm going to practice just pulling myself down. And the bar's not really going anywhere. I'm actually pulling myself to the bar. Yeah. So you can practice straight legs. And if you're balanced, you'll actually bounce right back up because your calves will hit your hamstrings and it'll stretch your tendons and so I just want you to so clear. Yes. Beautiful. That's the redirecting of the force. Yeah, exactly. And wherever the top of your head is pointed, that's where you're going to go. So if it's pointed that way, woo. And the breathing too. If you're like huffy puffy, that's a lot of tension in breathing, direction change. Beautiful, yeah. And I want you to try when you land, get a little external rotation. And I said, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Brandon, what is that?
I'm sorry.
And just try pointing your knees in different spots and see what that does to your catch position. And see how you kind of come onto the edges where those pinky toes are. And then the pinky toes are actually guiding where the legs and the hips reposition. That's why I blew my mind yesterday when we were talking about the arch. And I was like, oh my God, that's it. That's the relocation so you feel security. And then you're just like, oh. But now I want you to actually do this and try to land just on your heels. It's going to feel weird. Kind of stuck right now. So if you expect lifting to be hard, that will match your expectation. Oh, it's hard. I just gotta stick with it. It's like, but now I blew my back out because of lifting. Why? Because I wasn't actually in a good position for my lumbar to support. I was in flexion, just letting my body collapse like a big beanbag. In front of us to slightly behind us. So this is where the shoulder blades apart thing. Remember that? If you just watch me from the side, the weight starts in front of me, but here's where people are afraid to hit their chin because the bar has to come in front of me for just a second, and then I relocate my head, and then now my shoulder blades are together. So it doesn't have to be narrow like a clean, but I'm dipping with my pants down, and then I'm extending and pulling the pants up. And I'm just lifting my chin. And then just bringing the bar slightly behind my ears. So I just want you to experiment where the bar likes to be and then do cement arms. It'll start water arms, cement arms. Yeah. And a good hand balance line will be where you end up. Yeah. Good. Can you do that one more time for me? And then just catch on soft knees. She bent and she went, whoop. Yeah, so she kind of popped it and then got under. I want you to just mimic that as best as you can. Keeping the, yeah, there you go. Exactly. See, it's kind of natural. Woo, woo. If our spine is tall and our legs are like bamboo, we will relocate very naturally. Yeah. And a wider grip might help too to kind of explore different positions, but that's essentially all you're doing is relocating yourself out of the